In the vast, sun-scorched landscapes of Arizona, where the silence is broken only by the whispering wind, a lonely rancher named Dan led a life of quiet solitude. His days were marked by the familiar rhythm of ranch work, a routine as predictable as the rising sun. But one morning, something broke that pattern. A tiny, wild foal, with eyes full of a desperate plea, began to follow him. Dan couldn't know it yet, but this small creature was leading him toward a heart-wrenching discovery that would change his life forever. Dan was on his usual morning ride, his faithful horse Dusty moving with a steady gait across the arid land. The air was still, the heat already starting to build. Suddenly, Dusty's ears twitched and he let out a low nicker. Dan pulled on the reins, his eyes scanning the horizon. There, partially hidden by a cluster of mesquite trees, was a small, dusty brown foal. It was impossibly tiny, its legs trembling as it stood alone. Dan's first thought was that its mother must be nearby. He waited, expecting a protective mare to appear at any moment. But the minutes stretched into an hour, and the little colt remained utterly alone, its gaze fixed on him. Dan dismounted, moving slowly so as not to spook the little one. As he got closer, he saw the desperation in its eyes. This wasn't just a lost foal, it was a creature on the brink, pleading for help. He offered it some water from his canteen, which it drank greedily. A deep sense of unease settled over Dan. Where was its mother? A foal, this young wouldn't survive long on its own out here. He felt a pang of responsibility, a connection to this vulnerable life. He couldn't just leave it. He decided to lead the foal back to his ranch, hoping its mother would hear its calls and come looking for it. The little one followed, staying close to Dusty's side as if for protection. Back at the ranch, Dan made a temporary pen, giving the foal fresh water and some soft hay, though it barely touched the food. All night he heard its plaintive whinnies echoing in the darkness, a sound of pure loneliness that tore at his heart. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The foal wasn't just lost, it was trying to tell him something. The next morning, Dan knew he had to act. He saddled Dusty, a determined look on his face. When he opened the pen, the foal didn't run. Instead, it looked at him, then turned and started trotting purposefully back toward the wilderness, glancing back as if to say, "Follow me." A jolt of understanding went through Dan. The foal wasn't just following him for help, it was trying to lead him somewhere. He swung into the saddle and followed the tiny guide into the rugged terrain. The foal led him on a difficult journey, navigating rocky outcrops and thorny brush with an urgency that surprised Dan. It was as if the little creature was running on pure adrenaline and hope. They traveled for miles under the relentless sun. The foal was clearly exhausted, its small body trembling with fatigue, but it never stopped. It would pause only to make sure Dan was still behind it before pressing on. Dan's concern grew with every step. What could be driving this tiny animal to such lengths? Finally, the foal stopped at the edge of a steep, treacherous ravine. It let out a weak cry, its eyes fixed on something below. Dan dismounted, his heart pounding, and carefully made his way to the edge. He peered down, and what he saw made his blood run cold. There, wedged between two massive boulders at the bottom of the ravine, was a beautiful mare, the foal's mother. She was trapped, one of her legs bent at an unnatural angle. Her eyes were wide with pain and fear, but when she saw her foal, a soft nicker escaped her lips. Dan felt a wave of emotion wash over him, a mix of horror, pity, and a fierce determination. He finally understood the foal's desperate journey. It had been on a mission, seeking out the only help it could find. Looking at the exhausted little creature who had risked everything for its mother, Dan broke down. Tears streamed down his weathered face as he realized the depth of the bond he was witnessing and the immense trust the foal had placed in him. He quickly assessed the situation. The mare was in a perilous position, and getting her out would be incredibly difficult, if not impossible, for one person. But looking at the hopeful eyes of the little foal, Dan knew he couldn't give up. He had to try. He raced back to his ranch, his mind working furiously. He gathered every piece of equipment he could think of: heavy ropes, pulleys, a winch from his old truck, blankets, and a first aid kit. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the land, but Dan worked with a renewed sense of purpose. Returning to the ravine was a race against time. The temperature was dropping and the mare was growing weaker. Dan worked through the night, the beam of his headlamp cutting through the darkness. He carefully secured ropes around the boulders, creating a makeshift pulley system. It was grueling, back-breaking work. Every muscle in his body screamed in protest. Several times the ropes slipped and boulders shifted, sending his heart into his throat. He was exhausted, but every time he looked at the little foal huddled nearby, watching with unwavering faith, he found a new reserve of strength. As the first light of dawn painted the sky, Dan gave one final, mighty pull. The massive boulder that had pinned the mare's leg shifted just enough. With a surge of effort, he managed to create a gap large enough for her to pull herself free. She struggled to her feet, limping heavily but alive. The moment she was free, her foal rushed to her side, nudging her affectionately. The mare lowered her head, nuzzling her brave little one in a tender reunion. Watching them, Dan felt a profound sense of relief and joy that washed away all his exhaustion. He carefully guided the injured mare and her foal back to his ranch. He turned his largest corral into a recovery space for them, tending to the mare's leg and making sure they both had plenty of food and water. Over the next few weeks, he watched as the mare slowly healed under his care. The bond between the mother and her foal was a beautiful thing to witness, a testament to the power of love and resilience. The day finally came when the mare was strong enough to return to the wild. It was a bittersweet moment for Dan. He had grown deeply attached to the little family he had saved. He led them to the edge of his property, his heart heavy. The mare paused and looked back at him, her eyes seeming to convey a deep, silent gratitude. Then, with her foal trotting happily by her side, she turned and disappeared into the vast wilderness. Dan stood there for a long time, watching them go. The ranch felt quieter, emptier, but his heart was full. The wild foal had done more than just lead him to its mother, it had led him out of his own loneliness. In saving them, he had rediscovered a part of himself he thought was lost, a sense of purpose and connection. From that day on, Dan was no longer just a lonely rancher. He was a guardian, a friend to the wild creatures of the Arizona plains, his life forever enriched by the little foal who had trusted a human for help. Thank you so much for watching. This story is a powerful reminder that compassion knows no bounds, and that the smallest among us can have the biggest hearts. If you were touched by this story, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more incredible content. We'll see you in the next video.